The scream cut through the quiet cabin long before anyone knew where it came from. Not a loud, panicked scream, but a sharp, startled gasp, the kind a person makes when they see something they were never meant to see. It came from row 7, a soft, brittle sound that snapped the fragile morning calm on flight Olander 117. And for one breathless second, every passenger froze, unsure whether to look or pretend they heard nothing at all. Maggie Turner looked up first. She had spent decades reading human fear the way other people read street signs. From her seat in premium, 4 rows away, she saw the woman in 7D cover her mouth, eyes locked on the aisle, hands shaking like loose paper in the wind. People turned, curious, annoyed, concerned. But only Maggie noticed the source of her terror. A small object on the carpet. Something metallic. Something dropped. The man who had dropped it scooped it up fast, too fast for the average traveler. His shoulders tightened, his jaw paused. And then he glanced around with a kind of cold, measuring calm. The kind Maggie Turner recognized instantly. Not a killer, not a panicked passenger. Someone carrying a secret. Someone afraid of being exposed. The plane had not even left the gate. The senior flight attendant, Kate Miller, arrived a beat later, her voice firm but careful. "Ma'am, are you all right?" The woman nodded, embarrassed, waving it off. But her eyes drifted again to the man in the aisle. Tall, sandy hair, a grey blazer too heavy for the late autumn morning. He gave her a tight smile, as if daring her to say more. Maggie's pulse did not spike, not outwardly. Her face remained still. She blinked once, a slow, predatory blink, the kind that hid more than it revealed. But inside, something cold and controlled shifted gears. Her mission in Boston had nothing to do with this man, nothing to do with whatever he had nearly revealed in his hand. Her briefing that morning had been simple. Follow a financial courier connected to a trafficking ring. Observe. Do not engage. Turn the subject over to the Boston field office at touchdown. But life had taught Maggie the same brutal lesson again and again. Missions rarely stayed in their lane. She breathed in the recycled air, felt the weight of a long career on her spine, and pressed 2 fingers to the worn seam of her carry-on, a grounding habit from years past. She told herself not to get involved. Not yet. Kate Miller straightened, smoothing her uniform with the rigid grace of a woman who lived life by rules she enforced but no longer fully believed in. She was 52, experienced, stern, a little frayed around the edges. The kind of attendant who handled emergencies with precision, but handled people with an impatience she tried and failed to hide. Her gaze slid over Maggie briefly. Something softened, then tightened. A small nod of acknowledgement followed, almost respectful. Kate didn't know who Maggie was, but she knew Maggie wasn't ordinary. The engines hummed deeper as boarding finished. Luggage thumped overhead. The plane door sealed with a hydraulic sigh. Maggie felt the subtle shift of time closing in around her. She scanned the cabin, as she always did, noting hands, postures, breathing rhythms. The man in the grey blazer had taken seat 9A by the window. He stared straight ahead, blinking slowly, like someone rehearsing a lie. But her focus was interrupted by a quiet arrival beside her. He sat down gently in 4A, a thin man in his late 70s, with white hair combed neatly back and hands that trembled slightly as he buckled in. He looked like someone who carried entire decades of regret in the slope of his shoulders. He offered a small, polite smile. "Morning?" "Morning," Maggie replied. He paused, as if deciding whether to risk a conversation. Then he leaned closer, voice low. "Do you ever get the feeling you boarded the wrong plane, even when it's the right one?" Maggie studied him, the loneliness in his eyes, the way he held his breath after speaking, almost bracing for rejection. He wasn't looking for an answer. He was looking for human connection, the kind life had quietly taken from him over the years. Before she could respond, a thud sounded behind them. A bag hit the floor. A man cursed under his breath. Tension rippled subtly through the cabin again, the kind most passengers ignored, but Maggie catalogued like evidence. Kate approached, helping the man retrieve his bag, her tone curt but controlled. Yet her eyes flicked toward 9A, twice. Maggie caught it. Kate had noticed something too. Or someone. The captain's voice crackled overhead, calm and steady. They would be in the air in a few minutes. Weather clear, tailwind strong. Estimated arrival in Boston a little earlier than planned. But Maggie wasn't listening anymore. Something else caught her eye. A reflection. In the darkened plastic of the seatback screen, she saw 9A subtly angle his phone away from view. She didn't see the screen, just the behavior. Hesitation, secrecy. The small tremor in his fingers, not from fear, but from adrenaline. Then came the second sign. A young ground crew member stepped onto the plane, hurriedly whispering something to Kate. Kate stiffened, her jaw clenched. She dismissed him with a nod that masked more worry than authority. The crew member left, the door resealed. Kate smoothed her uniform again, but her hands shook for half a second. Then she began her safety walk through, too fast, too sharp, her voice brittle around the edges. Maggie understood the language of panic in others even when she didn't feel it herself. And this wasn't panic. It was pressure. Pressure on a woman who had spent years pushing down everything she didn't want to face. Whatever the ground crew had said, Kate did not want the passengers to know. The plane began to push back, the rumble of motion shivering through the frame like a warning. Maggie closed her eyes for a moment. She could feel the old ache building behind her ribs, the ache of choices that never felt like choices. Years of watching the world's darkest corners swallow people whole. She told herself to focus on the assignment, the courier, the drop in Boston, nothing more. But the cabin felt wrong, offbeat, disjointed, like a room full of people holding their breath for different reasons. She opened her eyes again. Seat 9A was staring at her, not curious, not confused, studying her, measuring her. He looked away a heartbeat too late. The engines roared to life, low and heavy, vibrating through her bones. And for the first time in a long time, Maggie Turner felt something she did not allow herself to feel on duty. A flicker of premonition, a sense that this flight would not land the way anyone expected. Not because of her mission, but because of the stranger in seat 9A. And because of the secret Kate Miller was trying, desperately, to keep sealed behind her strained smile and trembling hands. The wheels lifted from the runway. The cabin tilted upward into the pale morning light. And Maggie Turner understood the truth she had been trying not to face. The real danger on this flight had nothing to do with the man she was assigned to follow. It was already sitting 30 feet in front of her. The seatbelt sign blinked off with a soft chime, but no one moved right away. It was as if the entire cabin sensed the unease threading through the air, a thin wire stretched too tight. Maggie Turner felt it settle in her chest like a cold weight. She unlatched her belt slowly, letting her gaze drift, not searching, simply absorbing. Flight attendants moved through the aisle, but their rhythm was off. Even Emily Rose, normally light-footed and bright, walked with her shoulders slightly hunched, glancing toward the front, as if waiting for permission to breathe. Kate Miller emerged from the galley a moment later. Her face looked composed from a distance, but up close the truth bled through. Her eyes were too wide, her steps too careful, her smile too taut. She offered drinks down the aisle, but her mind wasn't on the service. She kept cutting glances toward 9A. Subtle, quick, anxious. Maggie didn't blame her. She'd seen that type of vigilance before. The stare of someone who knew more than they were allowed to say. Her seatmate, the older man in 4A, leaned slightly toward her, his voice low, uncertain. "You ever get the feeling we took off on the wrong day for the wrong reasons?" Maggie exhaled softly through her nose. "Sometimes people just give off the wrong kind of energy." He nodded, as if relieved someone else felt it too. "I used to work in private security long time ago. I know that look. The look of a man who's already rehearsed his escape route." 9A. Maggie didn't respond, but the way the truth brushed her skin felt too close. A thud sounded from behind them. A passenger in row 10 muttered under his breath. A bottle rolled down the aisle, clinking against metal seat legs, the sound too sharp in the quiet. Emily rushed to pick it up, apologizing gently, but her hand was trembling. Maggie kept watching. 9A shifted, pulling his backpack a little closer to his feet. Not unusual, but the way he did it, shielding it with his calf, turning his body slightly to block the aisle, carried intent. And his eyes darted again, quick, calculating, not nervous, but anticipating. The worst men Maggie had ever interrogated never showed fear. Fear validated guilt. Anticipation meant design. Kate passed Maggie, offering her a drink that looked more ceremonial than genuine. Maggie declined with a faint shake of her head. Kate nodded once, briskly, but her mask cracked for the briefest moment, concern flickering beneath the surface. And then a voice behind them broke the silence. "I saw him." It came from the woman in 7D. Soft, tremulous, but insistent enough to carry. Maggie looked back. The woman clutched the edges of her cardigan, knuckles white, hands trembling as she leaned toward her husband. "I saw exactly what he dropped." Her husband hushed her under his breath. "Evelyn, let it go. It's none of your business." "It is if we're trapped in here with him," she whispered, eyes darting toward 9A. Maggie shifted her posture slightly, enough to catch the woman's gaze. It was the kind of silent invitation she'd extended countless times. Talk if you need to. Don't if you can't. But Evelyn looked away, pressing her lips into a tight, frightened line. Kate overheard the exchange. Her jaw clenched. She approached the couple, bending slightly. "Is there an issue with your seat? Anything I can help with?" Evelyn shook her head, but the refusal came too fast, too forced. Kate didn't press it, though her concern deepened. She straightened and moved back toward the front, steps faster than before. The rising tension rippled across the cabin like wind through tall grass. Conversations shrank. A baby stopped fussing. Even the hum of the engines felt louder, heavier. Maggie's instincts sharpened to a razor's edge. She opened the overhead vent above her, letting cool air brush her face, grounding herself. Her mind began assembling patterns, connecting dots that never lied. A man guarding a bag too closely. A woman terrified by something she glimpsed. A flight attendant rattled by news she couldn't explain. A crew member interrupting boarding with urgency. The threads were separate, but threads always led somewhere. For the first time since takeoff, 9A stood. Not abruptly, not suspiciously, just enough to stretch, adjusting his jacket. His movements were measured, smooth. But then he reached into the overhead compartment and pulled down a small black case. Not a carry-on, not a toiletry kit. Something rigid and compact, the size of a book, but built like hardware. He held it too carefully, fingers tight around the latch. Maggie felt her muscles coil. Before she could observe further, Kate appeared again from the front, but this time her composure had shattered. Her voice trembled. Sir, would you mind keeping your items stowed until we're at cruising altitude?" 9A turned to her slowly, almost lazily. His smile slid across his face, thin and wrong. "I'm just getting comfortable." Kate froze. There was something in his eyes, something cold enough to pierce bone. Before she could reply, 9A locked the case and put it back, sitting down with a calmness that did not match the darkness settling around him. Kate stepped back, as if he had struck her. She steadied her hands against the seat in front, breath shaky. And for the first time, she looked toward Maggie, as though she sensed that something about Maggie was different. Someone who knew what to do. Someone who wasn't simply another passenger. But Maggie didn't move. Not yet. She watched Kate return to the galley on unsteady legs, watched Emily follow her with hesitant eyes. The galley curtain swayed behind them, revealing a flash of fear in both their faces before it closed. Her seatmate leaned toward her again. "That man," he whispered. His eyes, I've seen eyes like that before. Middle East, years ago. Men who carried death like it was currency. Maggie kept her eyes on 9A. "What did you do in security?" "Risk assessment." He swallowed. "But I'm too old for this now." "You're seeing clearly," she murmured. He hesitated. "Do you know who he is?" "No," Maggie said. "But I know what he is." The plane stabilized as it reached cruising altitude. A faint ding rang overhead. But instead of passengers standing or stretching, they stayed seated, uneasy, waiting for something unnamed to reveal itself. That was when Maggie finally allowed herself to look inward, into the part of her training that lived beneath instinct. She reviewed the moment the ground crew interrupted Kate, the way Kate's hands shook afterward, the man in 9A dropping something metallic, the woman who screamed, the case he guarded, the secrecy on his phone, the measuring stare. This man wasn't connected to her Boston assignment. He wasn't a courier, wasn't on her list, wasn't part of the justice she was chasing. He was unplanned, unexpected, a storm moving in from a direction no radar had marked. And yet he was the center of danger now. Then something shifted in the cabin's soundscape. A scrape, a buckle. Maggie's head snapped toward 9A. He had taken off his seatbelt. He leaned forward, reaching subtly under his seat. Not a weapon, not yet, but a piece of paper, a folded note. He slipped it into the seatback pocket of 7D, the woman who had screamed, as if delivering a message meant only for her. The woman stiffened when she saw it. Her trembling hand drifted slowly toward the pocket, but stopped halfway, too frightened to touch it. 9A sat back down, relaxed, confident, because the message was already delivered. And Maggie Turner realized the truth with a clarity that chilled her veins. This man wasn't afraid of being seen. He wanted it. He wanted to be noticed. He wanted an audience. And the plane, suspended 30,000 feet above the country, had become his stage. The note in 7D sat untouched, a thin white square against the dark pocket fabric. It might as well have been a live wire. Evelyn stared at it as though it could burn her. Her breath came shallow, each inhale catching at the top of her throat. Her husband placed a steadying hand on her arm, whispering, "Don't read it. Just leave it alone." But his voice lacked conviction. He was afraid too. 9A didn't look back. He didn't need to. He settled into his seat with the quiet assurance of a man who understood exactly how much power he held in a space so small, so enclosed, so helpless. He closed his eyes as if savoring the tension he'd created, his expression serene in a way that made Maggie's skin tighten. Maggie forced her gaze away from him and focused on Evelyn. Fear had a shape, a behavior, a path, and Evelyn was following it, step by trembling step. Her hand hovered again toward the pocket, but this time she didn't hesitate. She slid the note out carefully, shielding it from passengers beside her. Her eyes scanned the message. She gasped, this time without sound, clutching the paper so tightly it wrinkled like wilted leaves. Her husband leaned in, face creasing with worry as he read over her shoulder. When he looked up, his expression had drained of color. Maggie needed to know what the note said, but not yet, not abruptly. Pressure had to be eased, not spiked. She rose, stretching like someone shaking off stiffness. Calm. Measured. She stepped into the aisle just enough to shift her angle, just enough for Evelyn to see her. It worked. The woman's panic sharpened into something else, recognition of safety, or at least a plea for it. Maggie leaned closer, voice soft. "Ma'am, do you need help?" Evelyn blinked up at her, lips trembling. He said... She couldn't finish. Her husband clutched her hand, his thumb gliding over her knuckles in a silent plea to stay calm. Maggie kept her tone level. "Let me look." The husband hesitated. A moral line flickered across his face. Protect your wife, protect your privacy, protect yourself. But the moment passed. He handed the note over. Maggie unfolded it with deliberate care. Turbulence hit lightly then, a soft rattle, the kind pilots barely mentioned. But the timing felt deliberate, cruel, as though the sky itself punctuated the words on the page. She read, "I know who you are. I know what you saw. Keep quiet, or everyone on this plane pays for your curiosity." It wasn't the message that chilled her. It was the handwriting. Steady, practiced, meticulous. The handwriting of someone who thought in straight lines and sharp angles. Someone who didn't fear consequences, because he had already accepted them. Someone willing to drag others into his downfall. The engines droned on, a steady heartbeat beneath the rising dread. Maggie folded the note and slipped it into her coat pocket. "Mom," she said gently, "you didn't do anything wrong. Whatever he thinks you saw, it's not your burden to carry." Evelyn's voice cracked. "What if he has something dangerous? What if he—" "Then it's my responsibility," Maggie said quietly. Her seatmate in 4A watched her return, his expression heavy with recognition. "You're not just another traveler." Maggie didn't confirm it. She didn't need to. The man had survived enough years and enough shadows to recognize authority when it moved past him. His voice dropped even lower. "You think he's planning something?" "I think he's already started," she replied. 9A shifted again, adjusting the sleeves of his blazer. His phone buzzed once, silent mode, short vibration, but the subtle reaction in his eyes revealed everything. He checked it quickly, screen angled away, then slipped it into his pocket with a faint smirk. There it was, the missing piece. He wasn't acting alone. The thought hit Maggie with the weight of a truth she didn't want. Her original mission to Boston involved a courier tied to a trafficking network, but the man she was watching now had none of that courier's behavioral markers. And yet, the coordinated message, the hidden device earlier, his composure. This wasn't random. Different man, different operation. Same darkness. Kate appeared from the galley again, her face stiff with worry. She held a silver coffee pot, but her grip was far too tight for something so light. She poured for a businessman in 5C, her hand shaking just enough to spill a drop on the tray table. The man didn't complain. He simply stared at her, with the delayed awareness of someone realizing he'd boarded the wrong flight at the wrong moment. Maggie caught Kate's eye. The flight attendant froze mid-step, then exhaled shakily and walked toward her. "I need to speak with you," Kate murmured under her breath, her voice barely audible above the hum of the engines. Maggie nodded slightly. "Galley?" Kate led the way, pulling the curtain shut behind them. The small space felt even tighter than before. The coffee pot clicked as Kate set it down, her hands trembling in short bursts. She didn't look at Maggie. Not at first. Finally, she spoke. "Before we took off, the ground crew flagged a concern. About a passenger. Background check conflict. A discrepancy in identification." Her voice dropped further. But they didn't say which passenger. The unspoken truth rippled between them like a sudden draft, 9A hadn't slipped through the cracks. He had pushed through them. "What kind of discrepancy?" Maggie asked. Kate swallowed. "They weren't allowed to tell me. They just said to stay observant, that someone on board might be traveling under false credentials." Maggie felt the plane shudder slightly as it hit another thin pocket of turbulence, though the real turbulence was inside the galley. Kate's breath hitched. Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve. "I've been doing this for over 30 years, she whispered. "I've dealt with air rage, medical emergencies, fires, even a heart attack 2 seats away from me. But that man," her voice tightened, "he looked at me earlier like he was measuring where I'd fall." Maggie didn't soften. There wasn't time for comfort. If he's traveling under a false identity, he's not just nervous. He's hiding something worth protecting. Kate met her eyes with a sudden flash of determination beneath the fear. "If there's a threat on this plane, you need to tell me what to do." Maggie paused. She hadn't revealed her assignment, not officially. The Bureau trained its agents to stay silent until the moment silence endangered more than secrecy. And now, 30,000 feet above the ground, with a man who had already issued a targeted threat, secrecy had become a liability. "I can't tell you everything," she said, "but I can tell you this. I'm federal, and I need you to keep the cabin calm. No announcements, no sudden movements, no confrontations, nothing that pushes him." Kate closed her eyes, a single shaky inhale. When she opened them again, something had shifted. She wasn't just afraid. She was ready. "I'll handle the passengers," she said. Maggie nodded once. "And I'll handle him." But as she stepped out of the galley, she saw something that froze the breath in her chest. 9A was standing again. Not to stretch, not to reach for a bag. He was walking, slowly, deliberately, straight toward Evelyn in 7D, and the aisle between Maggie and him felt suddenly, impossibly narrow. He moved with a quiet purpose, each step measured, almost gentle, as if trying not to disturb the air he walked through. But intent clung to him like heat. Passengers shifted in their seats, sensing danger without understanding its shape. Maggie slipped into the aisle before she had time to overthink the distance between them. Her pulse stayed steady, but something colder moved beneath it. An instinct honed by decades of facing men who smiled while plotting ruin. 9A slowed when he saw her. Not surprised, not annoyed. More like amused. His eyes trailed up to meet hers, pale and empty. The kind of eyes that did not reflect back even the cabin lights. He stopped, just one row shy of Evelyn, forcing Maggie to intercept him naturally, as though she had simply risen for the restroom. She kept her voice calm. "Everything all right, sir?" He tilted his head as though appreciating the question, studying her face the way a chess player studies a board. His reply came soft, almost polite. "Just stretching my legs. Long flight." "You'll need to stay clear of the aisles while the drink service restarts," she said. "It's getting a little crowded up front." His smile was thin. "Crowded places make me alert." Behind him, Evelyn clutched her husband's arm. Her eyes shimmered with the kind of fear that begged for someone else to take control. The old man in 4A watched too, sitting forward slightly, breath caught in his throat. 9A leaned closer, only an inch, but enough to reveal the truth she had sensed from the start. He wasn't afraid of her. He was probing her, testing her. And when he spoke again, the words were not meant for the cabin. "You were watching me before I stood up," he murmured. "Why?" Maggie kept her expression still. The quiet hum of the engines filled the pause between them like a warning. "I watch everyone," she said. "Occupational habit." His smile deepened just enough to show he understood. "Then you're not a tourist." "Please return to your seat," she repeated. "Let the attendants do their work." He didn't move. For one long moment, neither of them did. The plane hit a small ripple of air, the kind that lifted your stomach for half a second. A few passengers gasped, but the man in 9A didn't flinch. He continued to study Maggie as if committing her to memory, aligning her into whatever story he believed he was writing. Finally, he stepped back. "Of course," he said. "Wouldn't want to cause trouble." He returned to his seat with deliberate calm, placing his hands neatly on the armrests like a man ready for the next command. Maggie exhaled quietly. She slipped into the row beside Evelyn, crouching just enough to speak softly without drawing attention. "What did he write?" she asked. Evelyn shook her head, still trembling. Her husband took the note from Maggie's pocket, as if handing over a piece of evidence. He said he knew her, knew what she saw. But she didn't see anything. She only saw him drop some kind of metal piece earlier. "What kind of piece?" Maggie asked. "A small cylinder," Evelyn whispered. "Maybe the size of a thumb, silver. It rolled under my seat. When he picked it up, he glared at me like I'd violated him." Maggie felt her stomach harden. A cylinder could be anything, harmless or not. And a man threatening a civilian to silence her meant he was thinking beyond panic. He was thinking in terms of control. She straightened slowly and returned to her seat. Her seatmate watched her with a tight jaw. "That man is not going to let this go," he said. "He marked her." "I know. You plan on confronting him again?" "When the time is right." He nodded, appreciating the restraint. "If you need another set of eyes, I'm here." His offer wasn't bravado. It was experience speaking to experience. She gave him a brief nod. A chime sounded as Kate approached with the drink cart again, her attempt to restore a sense of normalcy. But her face tightened when she saw Maggie rise. Maggie moved toward her, low-voiced. "How much do you know?" she asked. Kate hesitated. A woman carrying a tray of ginger ale brushed past, the cans clinking softly. Kate waited until she was gone before answering. "The ground crew didn't give details," she whispered. "Just that one of the names flagged didn't match federal travel records. A mismatch between the ID used to buy the ticket and the one tied to the photo. They told me to call if I noticed anything unusual." "You notice anything unusual now?" Maggie asked. Kate let out a quiet, bitter breath. "I've noticed everything unusual." "Including the note he gave the passenger in 7D, Maggie added. Kate's eyes widened. "He approached a passenger?" Maggie nodded. The fear that flickered across Kate's face transformed, not into panic, but into something heavier. Responsibility. She looked down the aisle, then back at Maggie. "What do we do?" "We keep the cabin steady," Maggie said. "Keep him from feeling threatened. And we watch every move." Kate nodded, gripping the cart handle to stop her hands from shaking. "I'll alert Emily. Quietly." Maggie returned to her seat. But as she settled, she noticed something new. Movement 3 rows behind 9A. A teenager with headphones bobbing to music. A man tapping on his laptop. A mother soothing a fussy child. And in the aisle, the flight phone. The one attendants used to communicate with the cockpit. It hung slightly off-center, as if someone had nudged it. Maggie frowned. 9A hadn't walked up far enough to reach it. But someone else had. Her seatmate followed her gaze. "You thinking what I'm thinking? That there may be more than one person involved?" she asked. Yes. A cold thread wound its way up her spine. The message on 9A's phone earlier. The buzz. The hidden case. The note to Evelyn. And now the disturbed phone in the aisle. Someone had used it. Recently. She rose again, moving casually, stretching as she passed the phone. Her fingertips brushed it just enough to feel warmth. Not body warmth. Electronic warmth. Someone had dialed. She returned to her seat, mind tightening. Her thoughts were no longer separate threads. They were converging, forming a pattern she didn't like. 9A wasn't acting alone. Kate's warning from the ground crew wasn't about him only. The mismatch of identity wasn't about one passenger. Two people. At least two. Her seatmate swallowed hard when he saw her face shift. It's worse than we thought, isn't it? Yes. He hesitated. Then who's the second one? She looked slowly down the length of the plane, over the faces, the bodies, the bags, the movements. And the answer slipped through her mind like a shadow crossing light. The second one hadn't revealed themselves yet, which meant the threat wasn't what they had seen. It was what they hadn't. The quiet inside the cabin thickened until every sound felt sharpened, unnatural, like the plane was holding its breath. Maggie Turner felt the shift, the way seasoned sailors sense changes in wind before a storm. Something in the cabin had altered. Not loudly, not visibly, but undeniably. 9A sat motionless now, his gaze fixed on the back of the seat in front of him. Too still, too controlled. He wasn't waiting. He was listening, measuring, counting the seconds between events only he understood. Maggie studied him with the kind of attention she usually reserved for interrogation rooms, noticing the way his fingers tapped a slow rhythm against his thigh. Not nervousness. A signal. A countdown. The kind of behavior men displayed when coordinating timing with someone else. Her seatmate leaned slightly toward her, voice soft and grave. I keep thinking about what you said, that he's not alone. If that's true... It is, Maggie said. Someone used the flight phone. Someone capable of masking it. He nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of her certainty. His fingers interlaced, knuckles whitening. Then we don't know who else is watching us. She scanned the cabin once more, feeling the pressure of countless possibilities. Every face, every bag, every calm expression held potential. The second accomplice could be young or old, male or female, composed or shaking. Hidden threats rarely looked like threats. Maggie resisted the urge to fixate on any one passenger too soon. Patterns only revealed themselves when pressure was applied. And pressure was rising. Kate approached with a composed expression that didn't match the hollowness behind her eyes. She paused at Maggie's row, as if adjusting the overhead bin, but her voice emerged low and taut. Emily checked the aft galley. No one back there used the phone, at least not while she was present. She said she heard something earlier, though, a faint click, like the handset being hung up. Maggie nodded. Then it was done quickly. Whoever did it needed only seconds. Kate swallowed. What do we do? If there are two of them, we stay ahead of them, Maggie said, and we don't let them see fear. Kate's carefully maintained composure cracked just a little. She exhaled, long and shaky. Passengers are starting to sense something's wrong. They don't know what, but they know. Maggie understood. Dread had a scent, a vibration, a frequency. People felt it even when they didn't understand it. A cabin full of strangers had become a single organism, reacting to the same invisible threat. Keep everyone calm, Maggie said. Routine is our ally. Kate nodded and moved on, though her steps were weighted with unspoken fear. 9A watched the exchange from the corner of his eye. His lips twitched in a faint smile. Maggie caught it and recognized the smile immediately. The satisfaction of a man who believed he was already winning. She returned the look with a blank calm that revealed nothing. The game had shifted, but she refused to let him see the board. A sudden clattering sound jolted the cabin. A tray slipped from Emily's hands several rows away, tumbling to the floor with a metallic clank that startled passengers into cutting sharp breaths. The baby that had been sleeping in 10C began to cry, the mother whispering soothing words while trying to hide her own trembling. Emily knelt to collect the scattered cups, Her face reddened. When she stood, her eyes flicked toward 9A with an instinctive wariness she couldn't mask. He glanced away casually, but Maggie caught the moment, the tension that pulsed between them like static. Emily approached the galley. Maggie stepped into the aisle as she passed. "Did he say something to you?" Maggie asked quietly. Emily hesitated before answering. "Not exactly, but when I walked past earlier, he looked at me, as if he knew something about me. Personal. It felt intentional." "Did he say a word? Make a gesture?" "No." Emily shook her head, exhaling. "He smiled. Just a small one, but it felt like a threat." Maggie wasn't surprised. Men like 9A used silence as a blade. They carved fear not with action, but anticipation. Emily tightened her grip on the tray. "Is he dangerous?" "Yes," Maggie said. "But panic is what he wants." Emily nodded slowly, courage flickering beneath her fear. As she returned to work, Maggie turned back toward her seat, only to find her seatmate staring at something behind her. She followed his gaze. Row 10. A middle-aged man in a navy sweater stood abruptly, reaching into the overhead bin. Not suspicious in itself, but he moved too fast, nerves evident in the way he fumbled the latch. His wife grabbed his wrist. "Sit down," she whispered fiercely. "Not now." "I just need my medication," he muttered. "You need to stay seated." Maggie read the exchange. The man wasn't a threat. He was reacting to one. Stress fractures were beginning to form in the cabin's emotional structure. The mother with the crying baby rose slightly, adjusting her child. The businessman in 5C pressed his fingers to his temples. Evelyn clutched her husband's hand as if anchoring herself to the seat. Fear was multiplying like sparks on dry grass. Maggie sat again, breathing slow, readying herself. She needed clarity. She needed control. The cabin's energy throbbed around her, thick with anxiety, but her mind sifted through it with practiced calm. 9A tapped his fingers again. 4 beats. Pause. 3 beats. Pause. 4 beats again. A code. A message. A signal for the second accomplice. Her seatmate murmured, "Did you see it?" "Yes. You know what it means. And no, it's not random." The man nodded grimly. "He's coordinating." Maggie leaned back, her mind analyzing possibilities with surgical precision. They weren't looking for panic. They were waiting for something timed, something triggered. But what? Another note? Another distraction? Another movement? The lights flickered, just for a second, barely noticeable. But everything inside the plane seemed to shift with that flicker, as if the cabin itself were warning them. 9A smiled again. Maggie sat forward, her instincts slamming into place. This wasn't about a weapon. Not yet, not directly. This was about control of the environment. Whoever had touched the flight phone might not have been sending a message. They might have been testing a system connected to power, to cabin communication, to locks, to alarms. Her seatmate whispered, horror dawning across his features. "He's not planning to attack the plane." "No," Maggie whispered back. "He's planning to take control of it." 9A tapped again. 4 beats. 2. 4. And someone, somewhere inside that cabin, tapped back. The answering tap was soft, almost imperceptible, but it traveled through the cabin like a pulse skipping a beat in a fragile heart. Maggie Turner didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. She let the sound settle, let it echo inside her mind as she traced its direction. Not from 9A, not from the row behind him. Farther. Aft cabin, left side. Maybe row 12 or 13. Someone had answered the signal. Her seatmate shifted, following her line of sight. "You heard it," he said under his breath. Yes. Where? Too early to confirm. She kept her expression still, eyes half-lidded the way hunters quiet their perceptiveness. But I felt it. A second tap followed, softer, deliberate. This time, Maggie saw the smallest movement 2 rows behind 9A. A slight turn of a head, the twitch of a shoulder, the reflex of someone responding without meaning to. A young man in a charcoal hoodie, pale, thin, hands clasped under his thighs, knuckles tense, leg bouncing in a nervous stutter. Barely noticeable to anyone else. Impossible to miss for her. He wasn't the second accomplice, not in behavior, not in composure. But he had reacted to the sound. Not intentionally, reflexively, which meant he heard the pattern before, which meant he recognized it, which meant he was connected. Maggie adjusted her breathing, lowering her gaze as if simply resting. Inside, her mind formed a silent map. 9A, the boy in the hoodie, the disturbed flight phone, the lights that flickered, the note to Evelyn, the metallic object, the smile. She needed to steady the cabin. The human heart can withstand danger better than uncertainty, and right now, everyone felt the uncertainty in the man in 9A, as if he radiated it. Kate moved toward her from the front, but Maggie gave the slightest shake of her head. Not now. Kate nodded and kept walking, but her pace slowed when she passed the boy in the hoodie. He hunched deeper into his seat, eyes fixed on his shoes. Maggie rose. The movement was casual, unhurried. But 9A's gaze snapped to her like a magnet. He watched her step away from her row and follow the aisle backward. Not toward the galley, not toward the restrooms, but to the section where the boy sat. She stopped beside the row. The boy stiffened. "Mind if I squeeze by?" she asked softly, gesturing toward the empty aisle seat. He hesitated, eyes flicking from her face to 9A, before he finally stood. His movements were jittery, hands shaking slightly as he stepped out. She slid into the aisle seat next to him and let a long silence stretch. "You reacted to the tapping," she said quietly. His breath hitched. "What tapping?" Her tone remained gentle, the kind you've heard before. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. Sweat glistened at his hairline. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You do," she murmured, "but pretending you don't might put you in more danger." He glanced again toward 9A. "I can't talk to you." "You already are." His leg bounced faster, his fingers twisted together. She leaned slightly closer. "Tell me your name." He stared at the seat back. "Nick." "How old are you, Nick?" He hesitated. 19. 19. Too young for this. Too scared for whatever he'd been drawn into. Too untrained to hide the truth from someone like Maggie. She waited. After a long moment, he whispered, "I didn't want to be part of this." "Part of what?" His voice trembled. "I don't even know exactly. They just told me to be here. Told me to watch for a signal. Told me not to get involved. But I didn't know he was going to." He cut himself off, panic flaring behind his eyes. Maggie's voice dropped lower. "You didn't know he would threaten passengers." Nick's breath came shallow. "I didn't think he'd do anything. He said he just needed me to track something for him, that's all." "Track what?" Nick shook his head so violently, it startled the woman in the next seat. "I can't," he said. Maggie cut him gently. "Nick, look at me." He did, trembling. "You're not in control here. He is, and he's using you. But you don't have to let him." Mick blinked fast, tears building. "He said it'd be quick, just a test run. No one would get hurt." "Test run?" The word struck her with an icy weight. Maggie steadied her breath. "Nick, is there something on this plane he installed? something he brought with him. Nick looked at 9A again. The man was sitting still, but not passive, listening with his body, listening with his stillness. Finally, Mick whispered, "He told me there's a device." "What kind of device?" Nick shook his head. "I never saw it. But he said once the signal goes out, something on board will respond. Something he planted before the flight." The air seemed to thin around Maggie. "Where?" she asked. Nick's lips parted, but no sound came out. "Nick," she urged, calm but firm. "Where is it?" "I don't know. He said I wouldn't need to. He said someone else on board would handle that part." Her pulse spiked. Someone else. A third accomplice. Hidden. Silent. Waiting. Maggie rose from the seat, placing a steadying hand on Nick's shoulder. "Stay here. Don't react to anything. Do you understand me?" He nodded, terrified. She moved back into the aisle, her chest tightening. She needed to reach Kate. She needed to alert the cockpit. She needed... Her thoughts cut off abruptly. 9A stood. Not casually this time. He stood slowly, deliberately, turning toward her with a precision that made the entire cabin still. His smile spread, slow and triumphant. He knew. He knew she'd been talking to Nick. The boy shrank into his seat. The mother in 10C clutched her baby closer. The businessman in 5C lowered his laptop, recognizing something had shifted. Maggie took one step toward 9A. He raised a single finger to his lips. Not a warning, a promise. Passengers watched them with wide, silent eyes. Kate froze mid-aisle, her hand tightening around the drink cart handle. Even the engines felt quieter. 9A lowered his hand. And then, without breaking eye contact with Maggie, he reached into his jacket. Gasps erupted. People stiffened. Someone whispered, "Oh God." But he didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a boarding pass. He held it delicately between two fingers, then let it fall. The small rectangle drifted downward, flipping once before landing at Maggie's feet. She looked down. The paper wasn't a boarding pass. It only looked like one. Printed across its surface, in small, clean letters, was a message. "You're too late. The device is already active." The paper felt heavier than it should have, as if the ink itself carried weight. Maggie Turner lifted it slowly, aware of every eye in the cabin fixed on her. Her pulse didn't spike. Her breath didn't hitch. But something inside her sank. A low, steady drop like an anchor finding the bottom of dark water. "You're too late. The device is already active." She folded the paper once, small and precise, and slipped it into her pocket. Nothing on her face revealed the storm rolling beneath her skin. 9A watched, his expression soft with triumph, as if the game he'd designed was unfolding exactly on schedule. Maggie stepped closer, until only one row separated them. "What did you activate?" Her voice was even, unshaken. He smiled, serene. Agent Turner. The title slid from his tongue like a secret he'd been waiting to reveal. A little suspense makes the flight go faster, don't you think? Passengers gasped softly. He knew. He knew who she was. He wanted her to know he knew. Maggie didn't look away. "You don't want to test me." His eyes flicked briefly toward the ceiling, where the cabin lights glowed an unnatural shade too warm, too bright. "I already have." A sharp tremor rippled through the cabin. Not turbulence, something internal. A hiccup of the electrical system. A flick of emergency lighting that shouldn't have flickered. The overhead speakers popped softly before the static dissolved. Kate stumbled in the aisle, gripping the seat back. "What was that?" Emily emerged from the rear galley, eyes wide.
The cabin intercom just reset. On its own.
Passengers began murmuring, anxiety rising like heat from asphalt. The baby in 10C began to cry again, louder this time. Maggie scanned the cabin, reading faces, postures, fear blooming in unpredictable patterns. She needed calm. She needed control.
"Kate,"
Maggie murmured.
"I need you to go to the cockpit right now."
Kate blinked hard.
"Should I tell the captain everything?" "Not yet. Just say we have a system irregularity."
Kate hesitated only a second before pushing the cart aside and moving up the aisle, shoulders square, steps brisk despite her fear. 9A leaned his head back against the seat and closed his eyes, as if the show had finally begun and he planned to enjoy it. Maggie turned away from him and looked for Nick. The 19-year-old was hunched forward, gripping his seatbelt with both hands like it was the only thing keeping him alive. She crouched beside him again.
"Nick, did he tell you anything else? Anything at all about the device?"
Nick swallowed so hard it made a sound.
"Just that it wasn't explosive."
Maggie kept her expression still, but inside her chest something shifted.
"Then what is it?" "He said it would talk to the plane," Nick whispered. "He kept saying that. It talks to the plane." "Talks to the plane?"
Her mind snapped through possibilities.
Sensors, cabin pressure systems, power routing, communication relays.
Something embedded, something externally triggered, something designed to manipulate systems rather than destroy them. What did he want it to do? She pressed. Nick shook his head desperately. "I don't know. I swear I don't know." Before she could push further, the PA system crackled to life. But it wasn't the captain. A voice she didn't recognize filled the cabin. Not quite electronic, not quite human. Something filtered, distorted, calm. "Ladies and gentlemen," it said through a soft hiss, "please return to your seats." Passengers stiffened. Maggie rose slowly, eyes scanning the ceiling speakers. The voice continued. "Remain calm. Follow instructions. Everything will proceed smoothly if you do exactly as you're told." Emily's hand flew to her mouth.
That's not the captain."
Kate reappeared from behind the cockpit door, pale as bone. She grabbed Maggie's arm.
"The cockpit's locked. They're not answering. Maggie, they're not responding."
Maggie's blood went cold. "Did you hear anything inside?"
"No, nothing.
Dead silent. Dead silent." 9A opened his eyes, his calm now a weapon. "I told you. A device that talks to the plane."
"Did you jam the cockpit communications?"
Maggie asked. He smiled. "I prefer the term override." Her seatmate in 4A braced his hands on the armrests.
"He's taken the intercom. What else can he reach? Autopilot? Door locks? Pressure systems?"
"Not yet," Maggie said, but she wasn't sure. Passengers began whispering, tension filling the air like smoke. A man in 8B fumbled with his seatbelt. A young woman across the aisle burst into tears. Someone stood, then sat again when the PA voice repeated monotone, "Remain seated." Maggie's mind raced. If 9A had an accomplice, and that accomplice had already accessed the flight phone, then the device wasn't a weapon. It was an intrusion. The plane itself had become part of their operation. She turned to Kate.
"We need the captain. Now."
Kate shook her head in a small, broken motion.
"We can't get in. I tried everything short of forcing the door."
9A's voice drifted lazily from his seat. "They're fine, Agent Turner. Just unavailable." Maggie's heartbeat grew heavy. A slow, relentless thud.
"What did you do to them?"
"I gave them a choice," he said. "Compliance or quiet?" They chose quiet. Passengers gasped. Kate's hand flew to her chest,
Emily stumbled backward. Maggie stepped into the aisle, voice low and deadly. "If you harmed them, you'll what?" 9A asked, almost bored. "Shoot me? On a plane filled with frightened civilians?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, eyes bright with something close to exhilaration. "You still think you're in control? That's adorable." Maggie forced herself to breathe. "Why this flight? Why these passengers?" He gestured around him. "Wrong question.
The right one is, how many people does it take to fly a plane?" Kate whispered, horrified. "Dear God." Maggie understood. Her stomach tightened. He wasn't trying to blow up the aircraft. He was trying to commandeer it. He wanted the world to witness him stealing a plane out of the sky. Her seatmate's voice shook as he murmured, "Maggie, if the cockpit crew is unresponsive." The implication hung in the air as heavy as gravity. The plane might be unmanned. The device might be linked to autopilot control. And the accomplice, the one still unidentifiable, might be the only person able to finish what 9A had started. Maggie turned slowly, scanning the faces of more than 100 people sealed in a metal tube miles above the earth. Any one of them could be the missing piece. 9A watched her search, and then he whispered, almost tenderly, "You're still too late." But Maggie Turner had faced monsters before, and she had never once accepted being late. The cabin had become a single, trembling heartbeat. Every passenger felt it, the thrum of fear humming through the recycled air, as if the plane itself knew it was no longer under the control of the men meant to fly it. Maggie Turner stood in the aisle, pulse steady, eyes scanning row by row, looking for movement that didn't match the rhythm of a passenger, but the precision of an operator. 9A lounged in his seat now, hands folded, as if the danger belonged solely to everyone else. His calm was an act of violence. He watched Maggie search the cabin with a gaze that said he already knew exactly when she'd realize the truth, and how much it would cost her. Kate pressed a hand to the wall to steady herself, whispering, "Maggie, if he's taken the intercom and the cockpit isn't responding, then we're flying blind." Maggie didn't answer. Not yet. Her eyes landed on a man in 13C who kept adjusting his watch, too often, too precisely. But then a woman in 9F shifted only when 9A did, mirroring his breath pattern, like someone reading a silent cue. A teenager near the emergency exit drummed her fingers in a pattern too similar to the rhythm 9A used earlier. And in the very last row, a middle-aged man stared straight ahead, unmoving, unblinking, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Any of them could be the accomplice. Or none. The device was active. The cockpit was offline. The intercom hijacked. The passengers restless. But the true danger wasn't noise. It was quiet. Maggie knelt beside Evelyn again. The woman was shaking violently now, her husband whispering comfort he didn't believe. "Did he say anything else to you?" Maggie asked. "Anything beyond the note?" Evelyn's voice cracked. "He said, 'Watch the lights.' I didn't know what he meant. Watch the lights." Maggie rose quickly, glancing at the ceiling panels. They flickered again, just a tremor, almost like a breath. But then something else hit her. Not the lights themselves, but the timing. The flicker came not from turbulence or electrical strain, but in reaction to something inside the cabin. A signal. A trigger. A test. 9A tapped the armrest again. 4 beats. Pause. 2 beats. The lights shimmered in the same sequence. Passengers murmured, sensing the pattern without understanding it. Maggie realized the device wasn't the threat. The device was the conduit. Someone on the plane had the trigger. Someone who wasn't 9A. If she moved too fast, she could tip off the real accomplice. If she moved too slow, the plane could slip completely out of human control. Her seatmate leaned close. His whisper barely disturbed the air.
"You have to find the operator. Now." "I know," she said.
Another tremor in the lights. Another response from the device. Another ripple of movement through the cabin, like birds shifting in a flock. 9A sat straighter. Maggie followed his gaze. It wasn't looking at her. It wasn't looking at Nick. It wasn't looking at Evelyn or the cockpit or the back of the plane. He was looking at row 12, at a man she had barely noticed before, middle-aged, wearing a Denver college sweatshirt, thinning hair, average in every way except for one detail she couldn't believe she had missed. He hadn't looked at 9A once. Not even a glance. Not when the note was delivered, not when the intercom was hijacked, not when passengers gasped or murmured or panicked. People instinctively watch danger. He didn't. He watched the window. Calm. Detached. As if waiting for a change in altitude. Maggie moved toward him, steps slow, steady, unthreatening. But before she reached his row, he turned his head. Finally, he looked at her. His expression was gentle, almost kind. A schoolteacher's patience, a pastor's calm, a man who seemed incapable of cruelty, which made the truth hit even harder. His eyes didn't reflect fear, they reflected certainty. He knew she'd found him. He offered a small nod, the type people give when meeting someone who has arrived exactly on schedule. Then he reached under his seat. Maggie lunged forward, grabbing his wrist before his fingers closed around the object hidden there. The man's expression flickered, not shock, not anger, but disappointment. "Agent Turner," he whispered. "You weren't supposed to interrupt yet." The passengers closest to them gasped. Kate froze mid-aisle, one hand covering her mouth. Emily's tray crashed to the floor, silverware scattering like metallic rain. Arose, not fast, not threatening, but deliberate, taking one step into the aisle. "Easy," he murmured, a warning only Maggie understood. But Maggie didn't release the man's wrist. "What's under the seat?" "You already know," he said softly. "The device needs a conductor, a human one. The system only obeys when a biological input starts the loop." A conductor. Biological input. He was the trigger. He was the one sending signals to the device. The boy in the hoodie wasn't the accomplice, just a pawn. 9A was the architect. But this man was the one who could shut down or escalate the entire operation with a single motion. "Let go," he said calmly. "You'll destabilize the sequence." "You're destabilizing the sequence," Maggie shot back. "Now tell me what it's programmed to do." He smiled slightly. That terrible, soft smile. Something the aviation world hasn't seen before. "Tell me," she demanded. "It's designed to demonstrate vulnerability," he said quietly. "For everyone to witness." "What vulnerability?" He leaned close, voice barely more than breath. "Autopilot override." Maggie's grip tightened. Passengers flinched when the lights flickered again, brighter this time. The man added, "We won't crash, not unless someone interferes." 9A spoke from behind her. "He's telling the truth. The plane will just drift. Off course, off communication, off grid." Kate gasped. "That would trigger an all-aircraft alert. Interception, emergency protocols." 9A smiled faintly. "That's the point." Maggie shifted her weight, pinning the man's wrist against the armrest. "Shut it down." "I can't," he said, voice soft. "Once the loop begins, it must complete. Otherwise the plane could lose stabilization." "Shut it down." "I'm sorry," he whispered. "It's already chosen its path." The plane suddenly tilted, just slightly, just enough for everyone to feel it. Just enough for every soul on board to understand that control
was no longer in the cockpit. Passengers screamed. Kate grabbed the overhead bin to steady herself. Emily sank to her knees, hands over her ears. Nick pressed his forehead against the seat in front of him. 9A whispered, almost gently, "Agent Turner, welcome to the new altitude." Maggie didn't let go of the man's wrist. But for the first time since stepping on the plane, she felt fear creeping at the edges of her resolve.
The tilt of the plane deepened, just enough for drinks to slide on tray tables, just enough for luggage to groan inside overhead bins, just enough for Maggie Turner to feel the shift in her bones. A wrongness. Not a dive, not turbulence. A slow, deliberate drift. The kind that made every instinct inside her flare to life. Passengers clutched armrests. A woman cried out. A man swore under his breath. Fear rose like heat in a closed room. The accomplice beneath her grip did not flinch. His pulse stayed steady, his voice calm, patient, almost mournful. "You're hurting your hand," he murmured. She tightened her hold anyway. "You're going to reverse this." "I can't." "Try harder." His eyes softened with something like pity. "You don't understand. It's not a switch. It's a sequence. And once it begins, the aircraft corrects itself according to the input it believes is authentic. You're telling me the plane thinks you're the pilot." His silence was confirmation. 9A stepped closer, his movements fluid, unhurried. Passengers froze at the sight of him rising again. Even the crying baby hiccuped into a stunned quiet. "You're wasting your strength," 9A said. He's not lying. The device spoofed the biometric signal. The aircraft believes he's at the controls. Maggie didn't look at him. "Why choose him?" The accomplice spoke gently. "Some people aren't noticed on flights. I'm one of them." "That's useful. You're a systems analyst," she said, seeing it now in his quiet posture, his calm gaze, the evenness of his breathing. "Or you used to be." His expression twitched with surprise. "I was an avionics engineer." "Of course. Someone who understood how a system could bend without breaking. Someone who understood airframes, redundancies, faults. Someone who could make a plane drift off course without triggering an immediate loss of control alert." "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "What's worth risking a plane full of passengers?" He looked at 9A, and there it was. The smallest tell. Loyalty mixed with fear. Admiration mixed with regret. 9A answered for him. Because he believes in the message. Which is? That nothing is as secure as the world pretends it is. Maggie rose quickly, pulling the accomplice up with her. Her voice cut through the air with hard precision. "You tampered with the aircraft. That's federal aviation sabotage." 9A smiled. "You're quoting charges at 30,000 feet. Someone should." Passengers watched, wide-eyed, holding their breath as though her voice itself could keep the plane level. Another tremor rolled through, more pronounced this time. A drink toppled. Someone screamed. Kate grabbed the intercom out of reflex, forgetting it was hijacked. The useless click made her gasp, her face draining of color. Maggie hauled the accomplice into the aisle, but as she did, Nick cried out from behind her, a warning she didn't have time to turn to hear. 9A moved fast, not with fists, not with a weapon, with purpose. He stepped between her and the aisle, positioning himself so subtly, so elegantly, that only someone trained would recognize the shift. He wasn't blocking her. He was isolating her. Passengers recoiled. Kate backed against a seat. Emily froze mid-step. 9A's voice came low, smooth. "You stop him. The plane loses its stabilizer input. Then autopilot doesn't drift. It drops." Maggie didn't blink. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" His gaze glinted. "Ask the engineer." She yanked the accomplice closer. "Tell me." The man winced, not from pain, but conflict. The plane can self-correct, but only if the biometric loop completes. Interrupt it midstream and the system defaults to manual control. That's good, Maggie said. The pilots can override. 9A's smile sharpened. Can they? The meaning struck her like a blow. The cockpit. Silent, unresponsive, unavailable. Something cold slid beneath her ribs. Anger, grief, dread. She couldn't name it. 9A leaned closer. You take him offline, the plane goes manual with no one to fly it. Passengers erupted, sobs, curses, whispered prayers. Her seatmate in 4A stood shakily, gripping the seat back. There must be a secondary failsafe, there always is. There was, the engineer murmured. But it only activates if the aircraft detects crew activity. And right now, his voice trailed off. Maggie felt the truth settle like ice. The plane believed there were no pilots. But what do you want? She said to 9A. What's your endgame? Visibility, he said simply. Attention. Not for me, for the idea. What idea? That one person with a device can redirect an entire flight path without ever touching the cockpit. That security is a story people tell themselves to fall asleep at night. People will die. No, he said softly. Not if you stop fighting me. She stared at him. You think I'm going to cooperate with this? I think, he said, stepping closer, lowering his voice until passengers couldn't hear. You care more about these people than you care about proving me wrong. Her pulse thudded hard once, then settled. The engineer looked up at her, eyes pleading. If you remove me now, the plane cannot stabilize. I'm not proud of what I've done, but I can still keep it from dropping. Maggie's chest constricted. He was right. Removing him now would send the plane into manual free drift, a condition that could escalate into something far worse. And if the cockpit was truly unmanned, they didn't have the margin for morality over physics. Kate whispered hoarsely, Maggie, what do we do? Passengers stared at her like she was the only thing tethering the plane to hope. 9A watched her like she was a piece in the puzzle he expected her to move exactly where he designed. But Maggie Turner had never played the role men like him gave her. She released the engineer's wrist, abruptly enough for him to flinch, gently enough for no one to panic. Then she stepped toward 9A, closing the distance until only breath separated them. You want attention, she murmured. You're going to get mine. His smile returned, slow, confident. She leaned in closer. And you're not going to like how it feels. He blinked, just once. A crack in the calm. Because for the first time since boarding that plane, he had no idea what she would do next. And Maggie Turner intended to use that. The cabin trembled with the kind of fear that lived under the skin, a crawling awareness that every breath, every second, every vibration of the aircraft carried weight. Maggie Turner stood face to face with 9A, her posture steady, her gaze unwavering. The rising terror around her folding into a sharp center of focus inside her chest. He expected her to lash out. He expected panic. He expected her to make the obvious move. She did none of those things. She stepped back instead. Passengers blinked, confused. 9A's smile twitched, the slightest crack, like a hairline fracture in glass. Maggie turned to Kate. I need you to gather the passengers at rows 1 through 6. Quietly. No announcements. Move slowly. Keep them calm. The instruction was soft, but absolute. Kate nodded, breath shaky but resolve firming. Okay, I can do that. She moved forward, gently tapping shoulders, guiding people with hushed reassurance. 9A lifted a brow. Trying to separate the cabin? That won't stop the loop. I'm not stopping the loop, Maggie said, eyes never leaving him. I'm clearing sightlines. He didn't understand yet. Good. The engineer, the human conduit, sat motionless now, hands in his lap, gaze unfocused. Guilt had settled into him like a shadow. Nick remained hunched 3 rows back, watching with the wide, haunted eyes of a boy who'd already lived too many mistakes. The plane tilted again, a soft lean to the right, enough to draw gasps from several passengers. Emily braced herself against a seat. The old man in 4A murmured a quiet prayer under his breath. Someone whispered that the plane was falling. It wasn't. Not yet. But it was drifting, steadily, like a leaf caught in a wind that blew from all the wrong directions. 9A clasped his hands behind his back, calm returning to his expression. No pilot, no controls, no overrides. You understand now there's no stopping this. Maggie ignored him. She knelt beside Nick again, voice low. He can't trigger the final sequence without a confirmation input. Does he need a signal? A phrase? A second device? Nick shook his head frantically. No second device, just the stabilizer code, the one the engineer uses, which means only one person can finish it. Nick nodded, terrified. Him. Maggie rose with a cold clarity settling into her bones. The engineer wasn't just a participant. He was the failsafe. The loop recognized him. The system obeyed him. He was the linchpin that held the entire hijack together. She turned toward Kate. Keep moving people forward. Don't stop. If he looks at you, look away. Fear feeds him. Kate stiffened, but continued her work. 9A watched with a curious tilt of his head. You're repositioning the passengers, but the danger isn't in front of them. No, Maggie said. It's beside them. She walked down the aisle until she stood directly beside the engineer's seat. He stared up at her, eyes glimmering with a sad resignation. I didn't want this, he whispered. But you started it, she replied. I thought it would be symbolic, a scare, a demonstration without consequences. You let the wrong man convince you that fear was harmless. His breath trembled. If you remove me, the plane drops. If I leave you here, he wins. Passengers nearby recoiled at the tension threading between them. 9A took a single step closer, interest sparking in his expression, like a man watching 2 chess pieces reach the end of the board. You have no move left, he said softly. Maggie didn't look at him. You should stop assuming you know the game. She turned her attention fully to the engineer. Your name? He swallowed. Daniel. Daniel, listen to me. Maggie crouched so her eyes were level with his. You said the plane would default to manual control, but the system won't drop if there's still an onboard command source. That's what I am, he whispered. No, she said quietly. You're only the first source. His brow furrowed. You built a system with redundancy, she continued. Every engineer does. You told him there was no fallback during the loop, but you lied. You told him just enough to get him to trust you. You told him what he needed to hear. 9A's expression hardened. Did you give him the full loop? Maggie pressed. Daniel's breath broke. No. Good. 9A lunged 1 step forward, rage slicing through his calm for the first time. Daniel. Daniel flinched. The cabin gasped. Maggie rose like a blade unsheathed, stepping into 9A's path. The device wasn't built to finish without Daniel's override. It's drifting now because he primed it to drift, but he didn't give you the key. Passengers watched, frozen. Daniel trembled, guilt and fear battling inside him. 9A's voice dropped into something cold and poisonous. Daniel, tell her the truth. I did, Daniel whispered. Maggie moved in close, seizing Daniel's trembling hands, reading the subtle tension in his fingers, the way he swallowed hard as though confessing something sacred.
"You built a back door," she said. Daniel broke. Tears welled. "Yes." 9A roared, a sound that made every passenger shriek. Maggie grabbed Daniel by the collar, pulling him to his feet. "Then use it." "I can't," he sobbed. "I don't know if it will stabilize." "It might, Daniel," she said, voice steel and fire. "Look at me." He did. "You're not the weapon. He is. You have one chance to take control back." 9A surged forward, but Maggie stepped in front of him, bracing her stance, eyes sharp as a knife's edge. "Move, and you lose whatever sliver of control you think you still have." Daniel reached beneath his seat again. Passengers screamed. Maggie didn't move. He pulled out a small pad, thin, metallic, glowing faintly blue. The cockpit override panel. 9A's face twisted with fury. Maggie pushed Daniel toward the galley. "You know the system. Plug it into the intercom relay. Now." Daniel stumbled forward, shaky but driven. Emily covered her mouth in shock as Maggie pressed him onward. "Go!" 9A charged. Maggie caught him by the shoulders, slamming him backward into the aisle wall. The impact echoed through the cabin. Rose gasped.
The old man in 4A stood to help, but she shook her head sharply. "Stay back." 9A snarled, teeth bared, spittle flying. "You don't understand what's at stake." "I do," she hissed. 170 lives. He shoved her. She slammed him back again. His hand grabbed her sleeve, twisting. Her fingers locked around his wrist, bending it until he gasped, losing balance long enough for her to shove him into an empty seat. In the galley, Daniel's trembling hands plugged the pad into the intercom port. Lights flickered. Oxygen masks jolted loose, then snapped back into place. A deep hum resonated through the aircraft frame. Daniel sobbed through clenched teeth. Come on, please." 9A roared again, trying to break free, but Maggie pinned him with all the force of a woman who had spent decades turning fear into strength. The hum deepened. The plane steadied. Passengers gasped as the drift corrected by a fraction, just enough to feel the nose lift ever so slightly. Daniel exhaled a sound between a cry and a prayer. "It's responding. I think it's responding." Maggie didn't release 9A. His breath came ragged, furious, disbelieving. "You brought me on this plane," she said, voice low. "You wanted an audience." His eyes burned with hatred. "Now the audience is watching you lose." For the first time, true fear flashed across his face. Daniel looked back at Maggie. "I can stabilize it. We can hold altitude. We can ride it until descent." Passengers burst into trembling applause, half relief, half exhaustion. Kate sobbed into her hands. Emily held Daniel's shoulders while he shook with adrenaline and guilt. Maggie tightened her grip on 9A, whispering into his ear, "You're done." He didn't reply. He didn't have to. The fight was gone from him. And as the plane leveled into its corrected course, as terrified passengers clung to one another, as Kate issued calming instructions with tears still shining on her cheeks, Maggie Turner stood tall in the aisle, holding the man who had tried to rewrite the sky. The cabin vibrated with something new now. Hope. If you felt the tension of this flight and want more stories of courage and truth, remember to like, subscribe, and comment 3 words in English. I choose courage.